Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. If you want to follow along with these tutorials, all the project files are available for free download on the FlippedNormals marketplace, so check out the link in the description. This is the first part of a multi-part series where we're going to be modeling and shading this lightsaber in Blender 2.8. In this first video though, we're going to be taking a look at the interface and the general workflow of Blender, just so that we don't have to cover that later on. So if you're brand new to Blender or you're brand new to 2.8, we highly recommend that you give this video here a look, because it's going to go through a lot of different things, like particularly the interface and just general things which we both had a hard time with when we first started with Blender.
So some of these things will also apply for people who are maybe switching over from other 3D softwares, which there are a lot of people doing right now. But whether you're a beginner to 3D or you're a veteran or you're just switching over, this should be a pretty comprehensive overview of hotkeys and the interface.
So this is what you're going to be seeing whenever you start up Blender. And you can see a nice friendly interface, which looks nice and modern. And we have a cube in the middle. Now, Blender looks like any other 3D software, but there are some differences. The first one is that it's incredibly hotkey based, so this is just something you should accept and make this a part of your daily workflow.
And it's actually, once you start getting used to the number of hotkeys and the kind of hotkeys that there are in Blender, it actually speeds up your workflow quite a bit. It's just, it takes some time committing it to memory and just practicing it over and over, but once you get it down, it actually speeds up your workflow quite a bit.
The next one is that navigation is also quite different from most other 3D software out there. When I started with Blender, I came directly from Maya, and I was really trying to find a Maya navigation for Blender, but trust me, you really don't want to fight this. Whenever you find a tutorial which states that this navigation doesn't conflict with anything else, it will. It will conflict with something somewhere. So just don't fight it and just get used to the Blender navigation and the hotkey setup. It's going to be a lot easier for you.
Yeah, the fact is that all tutorials out there that are for Blender are created with Blender hotkeys in mind. So the quicker you get on board with that, the easier. And it doesn't take that long to get used to.
The very first thing we are going to be doing is to make sure that the spacebar is set to search. And we do this under Edit, Preferences, and we do this under Key Map. You can also change this whenever you start a Blender for the first time. By default, it's going to be set to play, so that if you hit the spacebar, it's going to play the animation, which I don't do a whole lot. We're just going to set it to search. So whenever you hit the spacebar now, you just get up a search menu, which is very useful. So we are going to be looking into the navigation first. You can also see all the hotkeys down here, which is very handy. We pan around by hitting Shift and middle mouse button. We zoom by holding down Control and middle mouse button, or using the scroll wheel. I personally prefer to use the scroll wheel, but if you're using a tablet, you have to use Control and middle mouse button for that. And then rotation is very easy. It's simply middle mouse button and just rotate around. So if you're new to Blender, just practice these a little bit, and they're going to become second nature in no time at all. Even if it feels like you're really fighting your brain. Seriously, just try it out.
And coming from other 3D software, it might take half a day, but yeah. you'll get used to it.
Then it's weird to go back to the other packages.
It actually is.
Then we also have a menu for general navigation. This is found under the tilde key. This is a pie menu. Or if you're using a non-international keyboard, then it's just going to be the key which is right below your escape key, right above the tab. And it looks like this. So this is where we can go into the different orthographic views, like front, side, all these ones. This is my preferred method for doing this. And if you now just navigate around again, just middle mouse button, then you can just go out of the ortho view.
If you have a numpad, which most people do, except if you're on a laptop, you can also get to all these views with the numpad, the numbers 1, 4, 3, all the numbers from 0 to 9 that I couldn't count right now.
Morten knows 4 numbers and is exhausted.
And it's 1, 4, 3 something. Yeah, but the problem with the numpad is that you actually have to let go of your mouse, unless you want to like cross your left hand over to the numpad. So the tilde key for navigating around the different views, I think is definitely the fastest.
Another handy one as well is if we hit the same one and then we do view selected, now we're going to zoom right into it. Otherwise you're going to have to use the comma key or the period key on the numpad, which again is really stretching your arm a long way.
So get used to these pie menus. It's a big part of Blender, and they speed up a lot of things inside of Blender actually.
Now, the way we add new objects here is by hold down Shift and A. And now you see we have this really nice add menu. This is honestly one of my favorite things about Blender because it's so quick to just quickly add new things. We mostly going to be focusing on whatever is under mesh, because here we have all the primitives we need. So we can make, for instance, a plane. And now you can see here that inside this the cube, we now have a plane. If we want to select a different object now, we just left mouse button click on it. And this just selects objects. Very nice and easy. In order to actually manipulate it though, if you want to change if you want to move verts, polys, or edges around, you have to go into edit mode. Right now we're in object mode. You can see it up here. And that means you're doing stuff to the object. And you can't actually access any of the components.
Yeah, like the object is like a collection of the vertices, the edges, and the polygons. So you're making overall changes to the object.
So if you want to change this, go into edit mode, you hit the tab key, or you can go up here as well and just go between this. I just recommend hitting the tab key, and you're going to do this all the time. So now you can see that by default, all the verts are selected, and we're in vert mode. You can see the verts up here, a vert, edges, and polygons. And if we want to select a vert now, we can just click a vert or drag and click a vert. And now a vert has been selected. We can select edges by hitting the 2 key or by clicking over here. So 2 and then 3 for polys. So 1, 2, and 3. If you want to have all 3 selected at the same time, for instance, now you can see a polygon is selected, but if you want to see the verts as well, you can now hit Shift and click on the one you want. So now you can see that we can select an edge, we can select a poly, and we can select a vertex. This is really useful. Or if we disable this, you can hit the Shift key and then 1, 2, and 3. That's incredibly quick way of having multi-component selection.
And for anyone super new to 3D, just might be worth mentioning that a vert is the point where edges meet. An edge is an edge between 2 points, and a poly or a face is when you have 3 or more verts that are creating a face, basically.
And now if you want to select these, there are different ways of doing that. By default now, you can see that we have the select box tool enabled. So that just means if you just left mouse button drag, we now have a box. You can change this tool up here. So we can go between select box, select circle, and select lasso. So if we now were to change this to something like select circle, we can now just have a circle select, and this is just going to do a nice little paint selection. You can also change this, or toggle between this by hitting the W key, and that just goes between all of them.
Yeah, I feel like circle select might be it's not a good name for it because you don't actually select in a circle. It's just like the cursor becomes round and you can sort of like paint your selection with it.
Yeah, I assume this would be actually draw out a circle.
Yeah,
but it should just be named paint select. You can also see here as well, this is one of the quirks of Blender, which is very weird when you come from another software, is if you select 4 verts, it selects a polygon. This is very unusual, but it's once you know about this, then it's perfectly fine. One cool tool here as well is just a select tool. This is used a lot for tweaking. It's basically like a tweak tool, and now you can just left mouse button and drag, and it's just going to, you can just drag them around. And you can combine this with going to right view, for instance, and now it's going to move this only in the right view. Really quick for concepting or anything you want to do. We use this a lot for retopology as well. So if you want to do retopology, we recommend that you use this tool a lot.
Yeah, and tilde the key again to get into the different view modes there.
We also have a right-click menu. The right-click menu is context sensitive. So now you can see it's vertex context menu, and we have a bunch of vertex tools. If you go into edge mode, we're going to have a lot of edge menus. And then a polygon mode or face mode, by hitting the 3 key, we now get face operations. If you go into the object mode, by hitting the tab key, we also get more options as well, which are only available in the object context.
This might just be me being stupid when I first started using the software, but like for some reason I had a hard time getting my head around like going in and out of object and component mode or like the edit mode like that. But like the tab just switches between those 2 modes. So it's the same key for both, and it makes it really fast.
Yeah, once you get used to this, it's a really good workflow, and it means you have a separate component. You have a separate mode for components and from objects.
Yeah.
So now if you want to select multiple components, let's say you want to select this and this, you simply shift click it, and then you can select as many as you want. Same with polygons as well. Hit the 3 key to go into polygon mode, and then we just select multiple polygons. Now, these things here, it might sound like a small thing, with all these things, but this is the core foundation of 3D. You're going to be doing these operations over and over and over again.
And how about deselecting them?
Then you simply shift click again.
Hey, magic.
There we go. You can also hit the A key to select everything, or you can hit Alt A to deselect everything as well. This is really useful, and Alt A is in general the opposite of what the main hotkey was. So if A is select, then Alt A is going to be deselect.
So you can do this with a lot of different hotkeys. Add Alt into the mix, and generally that'll invert whatever that.
Around, scale them, and rotate them around as well. And you can find these with these nice little friendly gizmos over here. So if you click the move, now you see you get a little move gizmo. If you want to rotate, you get a nice little rotate gizmo. And if you want to scale it, you have a scale gizmo. Now, these are not really used a whole lot in Blender, and they're a very recent addition to it. People in Blender, they tend to be very gesture-based, which just means that you don't really use these tools. You just hit the hotkey for it, and you just move it around. This has several advantages. Most of that is just a lot faster. So instead of clicking here and then moving it around, you can use the hotkey for moving, which is the G key. So now you can just hit the G key and you start moving it around right away. So it just becomes incredibly fast. The hotkey for rotation is, maybe you guessed it, it is R for rotation.
Which is why it's so intuitive that G is move.
I think it's for grab.
Okay.
Which is, yeah, that's my response as well. Okay. And then we have S for scale. This is incredibly fast as well. Like, this is a lot faster than a lot of 3D software, because you simply hit the key and then you just start dragging the mouse right away.
The nice thing is actually you can like go off the screen as well. So you can just sort of like keep going infinitely, because it like just keeps going over the screen. You'll run out of disk space at some point probably, but it is an option.
Yeah, this is really useful that you can just keep dragging it. Now it's on the edge and then we keep going again. Control Z to undo as well. That's standard in Blender.
And everywhere, I think.
Also everywhere, which is weird that it's standard in
Blender.
So if you want to have control with this, it becomes a bit more hotkey, because if you want to hit the G key now and you want to move it from here to here, you're like, yay, cool. But you can see it's screen based, so it's very hard right now to move this in an accurate way. So what you need to do, you need to look at the axis. You can see the axis up here, and this is the X axis. So if you want to move this on the X axis, you hit the G key to enable grab, and then you hit the X, and now it's going to move it only on the X axis. A slightly weird thing about Blender as well, compared to some software, is that up is Z, so not Y as in a lot of other packages.
I guess it's like in Max,
yeah,
where
exactly.
up is Z, and maybe Maya's the weird one here, where up is
yeah,
Y. I don't know.
So if you want to move this on the Z axis, you hit G, and then you hit Z, and then you can move it up on the Z axis. The same is true for scaling as well. If you want to scale this on the X axis, hit S for scale, and then X, and then you can only scale it on the X axis. Now, if you want to move it on everything but an axis, you hit the S key, and then you hit Shift, whatever axis you don't want to scale it on. So if you want to scale anything but the Z axis, you hit Shift Z. And now you can see it scales on everything but the Z axis. This takes some time to get used to.
Yeah, that's a little confusing, but it's very, very useful, especially when scaling.
Yeah, it really is. You can also use it with the middle mouse button. So instead of hitting G and then Z to move it up and down, you can just hit the G key, and then you can just click the axis you want to go with the middle mouse button. So if you want to move it over here, you can now just click this. Some people prefer this. Some people really don't like this. This is really a personal preference. If you want precision, you really just stick to hitting the axis.
And what you can do is you can actually be even more precise there if you combine your transform tool with an axis and a number. Like if you have a specific number in mind you want to move something with. You could do the G key, then X to restrain it on the X axis, and then just a number. Like let's say you want to move it 2 units over, for example. You just hit the 2.
So that's just what we did now. If we hit G, and then X, and then 2. This is really useful as well when it comes to rotation. So if you want to rotate this 90 degrees on the X-axis, R for rotation, and then we do X, and then we do 90. This is a bit confusing in the beginning, and it is a bit weird that an advanced feature like this is kind of the default one, but I highly recommend that you get used to it, and if you have a hard time with it, then you can simply just use these features over here. So this is very easy to use. It's not as fast, but it's never going to fail you. You're never going to have a hard time actually rotating. Another tip as well is if you hold on Control key, now it's going to snap to every 5th degrees, which is quite useful. Also, if you are moving this up, let's say you're hitting the G key and you're moving it up now, and then you realize, oh crap, I don't want to do that. You simply hit right mouse button, and that's gonna cancel this action. So what I would often do is hit the G key, then want to snap it to an axis, and I realize it's a wrong axis. So then you can just hit the G key and try again. You're going to be using the right mouse button with a lot of times. It will cancel basically every operation in Blender.
It's pretty handy to have.
Then we have duplicate object. This is Shift and D, and now you can just drag it around all the time. You can see over here as well, it now gets duplicated. So one thing you have a lot when you are dealing with a lot of objects like this is you want to get really close to it like this, and you want to really see what's going on. Now, in order to do this, you can use the isolate selected feature, which is the numpad /, which is quite some time for quite some distance for your arm to actually travel, and you gotta release the mouse as well. And the annoying thing is that it actually moves the camera, but this is a feature you are going to be using a lot.
I can never remember. I think that's /. I think so, but it might be / I don't know.
It might be.
I can never remember the difference.
It's either / or /. At least it's a / key on the numpad.
Yeah.
And then we have another key you're going to be using a lot. That is the X key. X is going to delete it. So if you hit X key, now it says, do you want to delete it? And you hit yes. Do the same thing here, and now you can just delete all these. Now this is a bit annoying because you're being asked, hey, do you want to delete this? And you just told Blender, dude, I literally just hit delete. Of course I want to delete it. You don't have to ask me again. So we can change this. And we can also change, in the same go, we can change the isolate selected.
So generally, we try to not change too many things when we do tutorials, because we want as many people as possible to be able to follow the tutorials. But there are some minor non-intrusive hotkeys that we either modify, or there's some settings that we change a little bit. Those two are some of them.
So we're going to change this right away by going to Edit, Preferences. And if you go to Key Map, we can now just start to search for these features. So the first one we're going to search for is delete. And we're going to have, if you scroll down a little bit, it's going to say object. And here you can see object mode and delete, and it's the X key. So we don't care about any of the other ones, we just care about X. So open up by hitting the triangle. And now you can see there is a little button here which says confirm. So if we uncheck this one and we hit the X key again, boom, there we go. Deleted without any confirmation. This is going to save you a lot of time, and this is going to make your workflow a lot smoother.
A really cool thing about the Blender key mapper here is that you can see you have a really nice, it might look a little confusing because there's so many hotkeys, but it actually divides it into whatever mode you're in. So for example, this was specific to object mode. So changing it just for object mode, for example. You can add it as a global if you want to as well, or for any other mode.
Yeah, the hotkey setup here is quite intuitive. Yeah. Then we're going to change the isolation selected, or isolate selected, which is in Blender called local view. So we have here local view, and we have either forward, / one of them. And then we click here, and here we have frame selected. So if we disable this, and we now were to use the key. Oh, sorry, it is that one, the numpad. There we go. And there we go. And now if we were to click here, it would no longer frame the selected one. This just makes your life a lot easier. You can also remap this to something else than the numpad one because it's very far away. But we are not doing that in this tutorial. Another little cool hotkey tip as well is if you want to, you know the hotkey, but you don't actually know the name of it, you can go to Name and Key Binding, and now you can hit the hotkey one. So if you want Control X, you can now see.
Yeah, so you have to actually type it out. You can't just press Control X, for example. So you just type it out, and whatever key combination it is, it'll show up there. It's also really nice. I use this for checking whether I'm about to set up a conflicting hotkey that might delete something else. But like Henning said as well, if you know the hotkey for it, this is also a really great way to use it.
Yeah, I had this with local view. I didn't know what it was called. I just knew what hotkey was. So let's look at the menus or the items we have up here. So here we have the ability to switch between perspective and orthographic view. You're really not going to be doing this a whole lot, but once in a while you might accidentally click it, and then it's good to know where it is. The second one we have is going into the camera view as well. So whenever you want to go into the render view and actually see what's being rendered, click this little camera icon. And we also have the gizmo. You can use this to rotate around. I mostly use it just to see what axis I'm on, because I find it to be very confusing. Obviously, you can know set is up, but what if you're rotated like this on a crazy object? It's very hard to know which axis is where. And then we have this menu is incredibly handy, because you can make different kinds of objects non-selectable and invisible. So if you want to hide all the lights, you can click the eye icon on lights, and lights are no longer visible in the viewport. And
they also won't affect your objects in the render.
And if you want to make sure that meshes are not selectable, you can select the triangle or the little, whatever that is,
the little arrow, GPS icon,
the GPS icon, and then you can no longer select this in the viewport. This is something you wouldn't use all the time, but let's say you're animating something and you only want to have curves selected and you don't want to have meshes selected. This is really useful.
Yeah, or if you have a complex scene with maybe you have curves inside of meshes or something, you could set the meshes to be non-selectable and just be able to select the curves that way.
We also have this key, which hides and shows all the gizmos. Like, you might want this, or you might find it annoying. A lot of times you don't want it, so you can just disable it. Under here as well, you also have the ability to make sure that the move, rotate, and scale gizmo are visible at all times. So if we were to click all these now, you can now see that they're visible at all times, which is really useful if you need to move a lot of objects, because then you don't have to go crazy with hotkeys. You can simply just scale them and rotate them around like this.
Yeah, and if you're just starting out, maybe this is a good way to sort of like get used to navigating in 3D space.
Then we have the overlays. Overlays is basically everything which overlays the view. This can be grids, it can be wireframe. It's also all these extras like lights and cameras and all that. So if you really want a clean view, maybe you want to do a play blast, or you want to just present your viewport to somebody, then you can just disable all overlays. You can also go in here and you can disable extras, which is going to hide the camera and the light. You can also enable wireframe as well. So now you can see the wireframe of all the objects in the scene. So if you look at this one now, and we go in here, enable wireframe, and now we can very quickly just toggle on and off. And then we have some handy ones over here. This is Xray, where you can just see the objects being transparent. So click it, or even better, use the hotkey or Alt Z. We can also use the hotkey Shift Z to go into wireframe mode as well. You're going to be using this quite a lot. Whenever you're modeling, you're going to go into Xray and into wireframe a lot. And then we have some menu items here we're going to be using a lot as well. Again, wireframe. Then we have shaded. You've already seen these two. These are the ones we've been going between all the time. Then we have look dev, and then we have rendered. Rendered is one you're going to be looking at a lot as well. This is actually a rendered version of your viewport using the default render engine.
Yeah, so we can have either Eevee for real time or cycles for a little less real time, but very, very nice.
Then we have the transforms. So here you can see we have transforms for all the items, for all the objects. So if you want to actually see the real transforms, this would be under the item and top right corner. Here we can see do the rotation. Keep in mind this is actual object rotation and object scaling, and it's not component mode. So if you were to go into your component now, into edit mode, move these around, this would not affect this, which is really important to know.
One other cool trick here is like you can do this with any menu item in Blender. If you want to have a specific translation to an object or something like that, you can just do math in the input. So again, if you wanted to move it like 5 units or something and you didn't know what 5 was, but you happen to have half of 5, 2.5, and you wanted to multiply it by 2 or whatever. It's like the weirdest example, but yeah, you could do that. You could do any math. Well, maybe not any math, but you could definitely do math.
You can do basic math.
Basic math. You like?
No.
No, really, no. Okay.
No, I can't.
Yeah, but also because I don't know math.
No,
so
exactly.
I'm sitting here trying to think of what kind of math. I don't know any math language. So
it's also quite handy because you can select all of these at the same time. So you can just drag them down, and now you can set the scale to 1, and now they're all going to have the exact same scale. It's also really cool. You can see the dimension of the object as well. So if we were to scale this further, you can now see the dimensions of this. Quite handy. And then if we go to view, there is one little guy here we want to keep your attention to.
Yeah, this was really frustrating when you first get into Blender, actually.
So if you go to the camera view, or you can hit the 0 hotkey on the numpad, and now you're like, cool, like what I expect now, if I were to rotate my camera, it is going to, you know, rotate the camera. Psych. Doesn't work. So this is really annoying because now you've got to move the camera around manually using actually, you know, the transforms for it, which is terrible. Or you can click this little button, lock camera to view. And if you do this, you can see this little red border. And now you can just use default navigation and you can just navigate it in the exact same way.
So it's important to note that in 3D, there's like, at least in Blender, there's a distinction between cameras. You have your render camera, but you also have your perspective camera. So the perspective camera is just your view, which you don't really render. The render camera, the camera itself that you see in the something, you can't quite figure out why it doesn't look like the one you've just framed. It's because you're not looking through the actual camera.
Yeah, this was quite confusing to me in the beginning when doing 3D.
Yeah, it's also because you had to lock it to the view. So
yeah, exactly.
That whole menu there, the view, the tools, name menu, you can show and hide with the N key as well. Just, you know, get in and out real quick if you don't want to look at it.
Another hotkey is the T key to hide this. So if you button smash everything in Blender and you're like, where did my tools go? It's the T key. So T and N used a lot. Okay, so if we go under shaded, we now have more viewport options. And if you see, we have this little triangle for shading. And what we're going to be looking at here is going to be backface culling. This is going to be something you're going to be using a lot. You see, for instance, this plane. It looks like it looks the same from both sides, but that's a filthy lie. This gets very confusing as you model because it's actually invisible from this side. But because it has double faces enabled, you can't actually see it. So if we were to go into backface culling now you can see it becomes invisible from this side and visible from this side. If you don't have this enabled, it's going to cause all sorts of issues for you when you're modeling, because you might have like FlippedNormals all over the place, and you can't and you can't actually you're just gonna have modeling issues.
Yeah, so backface culling is a really good optimization tool button click when you're modeling, just because it makes it a lot more. It's just a lot easier to see what you're actually doing. Now, keep in mind, this is like, it takes effect when you have an object that has 0 thickness. So basically, a plane is a single-sided object. There is no thickness to it. It's infinitely thin, which is, you know, impossible. But in 3D, it's totally possible. So whenever you have these objects, you'll be able to look straight through them. The same thing if you go on the inside of an object. Technically, the inside of the object will also be what's like invisible, like have no thickness, even though the object itself has thickness. So you'll be able to look through the object. It can come in handy sometimes.
Yeah, whenever I see a student have modeling issues and it's some inexplainable issue, it's probably because of this issue. Now we are going to be looking at the outliner. The outliner is the nice little collection up here of where we have, well, collections, and then we have the camera, we have the objects, and we have the light. This is where all your items and objects in your scene will be living. Now, this is not similar to other 3D software, which might be using groups. If you come from Maya, you might be like, oh, cool, it has an outliner and it has a group. It doesn't. This here is just a visual representation of what's in your scene. If you were to delete this, it doesn't actually delete the items, it just deletes the collection. It just takes the things out of the collection and spreads it across the scene.
So it's like it's kind of like having a folder on your desktop, except if you delete the folder, all the files get put on the desktop now.
Yeah, exactly. You can also see here that if you were to collapse it by hitting the friendly triangle button, you can see what the collection contains. So here it contains models or meshes, contains lights, and contains cameras. We can also toggle visibility for it, and we can make a new collection by hitting the right mouse button and new, or we can click up here as well. So if you want to move stuff into a collection, then the hotkey is M, and then you can move it into collection 3, and now you can see it's under collection 3.
One really cool feature there, you saw Henning selecting the plane. If you try to minimize collection group number 3, it'll actually show you whatever object you've selected in the viewport, where it lies in which collection. So if you select the cube now, it'll highlight the little mesh down there. So that can be quite nice for organization, figuring out which collection does my object actually live in.
And as with the filters up here, we can also have filters here. These are really useful because it allows you to enable stuff like selection filters or selection toggles, and renderable. Is this visible in the render? So if we were to now hit the selection toggles, and now you see we have this nice little arrow key. So if we make this non-selectable, we can't actually select this because it's, well, non-selectable. You want this a lot of times, particularly if you're doing retopology, then you don't want the high risk to be selected. You can just disable again by going up here and clicking it. This was also a really cool feature which I recently learned. If you click on the display mode, we have different ways of viewing the data in the scene. One thing I really like here is the Blender file one. This is a really good way to visualize exactly what's going on in your scene. If you have a lot of materials, you might see what's going on. For instance, if you want to just see all the meshes you have in your scene, and you want to delete some of them, and you can just go in and just hit delete, and now you delete them. Very nice way to organize your scene. Go back and hit view layer, and we are back to where we were. All right, so now we're going to be looking at the properties. So we are only going to be showing you some of the properties here, some of the scene properties and object properties, because we have a lot.
Yes.
So the first one we're looking at is the render, and this looks like the back of a camera, which is because that's where you change the camera settings. Here we can change the render engine to cycles, or we can use Eevee. We'll go way more in depth on this later, but basically this entire context, this is all about just render settings. Then we have the output settings. This is where you would choose something like the resolution. If we hit the 0 key, we can now choose the resolution. And frame range and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to be spending a whole lot of time here, but it's very important when you are rendering anything. Whether you render to and what format is it. And then we have modifiers. We hit the 0 key again. If we want to do something procedurally to this object, we can easily do that. If we hit the wrench key down here, we can go to modifiers. And now we can add a bevel modifier to this, and that's going to change actually the model. Now we can see it applies procedurally a bevel modifier to it, which is really useful. We can also add an array modifier to it, and that's just going to duplicate the object. Oops, that was the wrong one. So
this is one of the strengths of Blender, being able to have modifiers that you can stack on top of each other without having to commit them. You know, it's not a definite change that you make to it. You can hide the modifiers again. You can add more. You can switch the order of modifiers. So you have this flexibility where you don't really have to commit to an option. Let's say you want to do design changes. You're using this array to make, like, I don't know, cobblestones or something. You switch off some of the cobblestone, switch the design of it, and it's all dynamic because it's all procedurally done with modifiers.
Then we have the object context. This is where you would have a lot of specific settings to this object, like the visibility. We can choose show in viewport, make it selectable, show in renders, and a bunch of other things. You're not going to be using this all the time, but once you need it, it's extremely handy. And then we also have the green one here. This is where you have the object data. This is different based on every single object or object type you have. Here you can see this is a mesh. We have the normals, the face maps, or if we switch this to the camera, you can now see we have camera data. Or if we switch this to light, we now have the light data on it. Into color of it, and you actually have the properties of the specific things selected. Now, one thing you have probably noticed, and maybe even heard about, is this little weird guy here. This is...
it's Blender's special child.
Yeah, this is Blender's special child. This is a 3D cursor, and this has a bunch of different features, and it's really quite handy once you start to love it. If you don't know what it's doing, you really need to learn what it's actually doing. So, if we were to make an object right now, it's going to make this object at wherever this 3D cursor is. So we can move this 3D cursor around by hitting Shift right mouse button. So if we were to make another object now, Control or Shift A, and then we can make a circle. And there you can see it makes it at the location here. So this is something you've probably done. You hit Shift right mouse button, and now all your objects are just created in a random spot somewhere in the distance. We can move this around by like in a more controlled way instead of just Shift right mouse button. We can hit Shift S, and now we get up a little pie menu. we can choose cursor to world origin, and that just moves it directly here. And then we can also go into the component mode, and we can set this cursor to selected, and that's going to move the cursor to the selected point. So if you now want to make objects at this point, you can hit Shift A, and we can make a cube. And now we get a cube at this point. So again, that is select the point you want, and then we hit Shift S, and then we do cursor to selected.
And very important, you can only get this up if you're in edit mode, which you can get up with the tab key.
Yes.
So you can go in out of that, and then you can place the 3D cursor basically anywhere there is a point on an object.
Then we can also do selection to active, and now this is going to move the point to wherever that is. It's going to move the model to wherever the 3D cursor is. And then when you want to reset this, you go Shift S and you do cursor to world origin, and there we go. And we also have a thing here called an origin point. This is something which confused me quite a lot in the beginning of Blender as well. If you see inside the model, there is like this orange point. Now, this is really annoying because moving this point around is quite a challenge sometimes. And it's a really important point to keep track of, because a lot of deformers, or all deformers, they will base their deformation, sorry, all modifiers will base their origin on this point in the model. So we run out to delete these, and then we make another plane. And let's just quickly go on to the modifier stack, and then we can make a screw modifier. Put this to 1. So now we have a nice little screw from this single plane. Now you can see that the screw modifier works based on this single origin point. So if we want this to work from a different point, we're going to have to move the origin point. But you can't really just click on it, unfortunately, which you can in some other software. So what you got to do is, first, we need to move the 3D cursor to a point, and then we need to move the origin point to the 3D cursor. So if we want to move it here, we go into the tab key, or we hit the tab key, then we do cursor to selected, and this is going to snap the cursor to this point. Now we have a cursor at this exact point, so we can now easily move the origin point to this. So go to object, set origin, and then we do origin to 3D cursor. Now you're going to see that this changes everything about the modifier. The reason we are mentioning this is because if you don't understand what an origin point is, your modifier is going to be all over the place. Now, you might have to watch this a few times in order to actually understand what's going on, because there is a lot, particularly with the 3D cursor. But you just have to know there is an origin point, and this might cause issues for you if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, it might not seem immediately useful to be able to know how to move this around and what it does to the modifier, but just being aware that it exists and that you can manipulate it, but it just takes a little bit of work, that's really important.
The next thing we're going to be talking about is transformation orientation and pivot points. This is very useful when it comes to moving around things and scaling things up and rotating them. So if we now were to rotate this object around, let's just rotate around like this, you can see that the gizmo still stays the same. So what if you want to rotate this now based on the local orientation of this? We can go up here, global, and set this to local. And there we go. We can now start to move this, for instance, in the local space. So now we can move this around in the local space. So again, that's up here, and then it's local. So let's duplicate this guy around a little bit.
Yeah, there's actually some cool ways you can play around with your objects once you start using different kind of object spaces, local, global.
Yeah, we'll probably do more specific tutorials about this in the future as well. So if we select all of these by shift clicking on them, we want to scale these up now. Just hit the scale key. And now we kind of have a question, which is, yeah, cool, it's scaling, but what is the scaling based on? Is it scaling based on 3D cursor? Is it scaling based on this object, or whatever is scaling based on? So if we click this guy now, the pivot point, this determines where it's scaling based on. So now it's scaling based on the median points. We can set this to 3D cursor as well, which means it's going to be scaling based on this point. Or we can scale it based on individual origins, which is going to scale them up and down by the individual point. Like imagine you have a bunch of trees on a forest and you want to scale up every single tree. You can't do that.
So this is also a really cool use case of the origin point. Like if you, right now the origin points are in the center of the boxes. If you were to move the origin point to maybe one of the points, like one of the outer edges, it'll scale from that point.
So the very last thing we are going to be looking into is briefly how you can customize the interface. This is one of the strengths of Blender, and you're going to see people do this in tutorials all the time. So if you want to have another window here, which could be whatever, then you can drag this. You see there's there's a gap, like a smooth corner. You can just drag the smooth corner and just drag it over, and now we get another 3D viewport. If you click up here in the top left corner, you see it says editor type, and we can click this to be something else. We can click this to be a shader editor, for instance. Click this to be info, text editor. So this is really handy because you can suddenly, just within seconds, you can now have another 3D editor which works independently of the other one. So if you want to have reference images in one, for instance, or you want to be just be a render view, they can work completely independently of what is in this view. And
I think it's like infinite how many you can create within other spaces.
Yeah, you're probably restricted by the actual resolution on your screen.
Yeah, probably. So you could keep dragging multiple ones out. You can also do that by right-clicking in between the areas. You can actually create a new area right there, and you can actually split that again. So if you didn't want to go and select that little corner, which can be quite tedious because it's quite small, you can right-click in between work areas and make a new one. So
I prefer to do this whenever I'm rendering. Then I prefer to have one render view like this in the camera, and then I prefer to have one view I can work in, and then one which might be a wireframe or might be something else. If you want to remove these, just right-click on the border between them and hit Join Area, and now you see this nice little arrow key pops up. So if you want to just destroy this, we just make it go down, and then we do right-click on the other one and Join Area, and then we click it over there.
This is also possible from the same place where you create a new menu, where you drag it out. But again, it's a little fiddly sometimes, so it is possible. But if you move your cursor in the wrong way, sometimes you create multiple menus like this. So the easiest way is just to right-click in between them.
Yeah, that's why I prefer to do this, because
because you know that it works every time.
Yeah, exactly. So with that said, you should now know basically everything about Blender. There is nothing more to teach you about anything, and there will be no more tutorials from us about Blender.
Except for the next ones in this
Except
series.
for the next ones. Yeah, so we just wanted to do this quick video here. Well, not so quick.
Not so quick, but very thorough video.
But very thorough video. We just wanted to do this so that once we get into the modeling and lighting of the lightsaber, that you didn't actually have to worry about the interface items, and you can just get straight to modeling and then later on shading and lighting.
Yeah, it would probably be good to revisit this video a little bit, just make sure that you got everything covered. We'll of course also be providing all the hotkeys, so there were quite a lot, and
there were a few.
They can be quite hard to remember, so check the description for those.
So we look forward to seeing you in the next video. We are going to be actually modeling up this lightsaber.
So if you want to follow along with this chapter that you've just watched, make sure to head over to the FlippedNormals Marketplace. There's a link in the description where you can pick up the free project files for this lightsaber project. So we have project files for each chapter. So you can kind of follow along to see, okay, what is the progress from chapter to chapter here.